a historic turning point in the battle against one of the world's deadliest diseases, as the first ever vaccine for malaria gets the green light. Approval by the WHO marks a breakthrough more than 100 years in the making against a parasite that kills one child every 2 minutes.
This vaccine is a gift to the world, a breakthrough for science, child health, and malaria control.
John Ray reports from Malawi on a jab that could benefit billions. Also in News at 10 tonight. Boris Johnson sets out his economic vision for the country, but warns it'll be a hard road to get there.
It will take time, and sometimes it will be difficult, but that was the change that people voted for. And to deliver that change, we will get on with our job of uniting and levelling up across the UK.
So while the PM focused on the future, how did the speech go down with those dealing with the current reality of growing bills and benefit cuts?
I don't understand how he's going to increase wages, increase jobs.
Set upon and needing surgery, a nearly 50% rise in hate crimes against East Asian Britons in the wake of the pandemic. And 40 years on, how the legacy of the all-female protest camp at Greenham Common is inspiring change and promoting peace.
This is ITV News at 10 with Rageh Omaar.
Good evening, and indeed it is. In the decades-long search for an effective vaccine against malaria, every single year it kills around 400,000 people. Most are in Africa, and most of them are children. Today, the World Health Organization gave the go-ahead for the world's first vaccine against the disease to be given to babies across Africa. A historic moment, it called it, and rightly so. It is only 30% effective, but because of the number of cases, it will save the lives of hundreds of thousands of children. They'll need 4 vaccinations before they are 18 months old and may need boosters too. But as one expert put it, we've all learned from the pandemic how important vaccines are in reducing hospitalizations and deaths, even if they don't stop the spread.
It is a lifesaver, but it's been a long time coming. Malaria is an ancient curse, and it preys in the most part on the youngest, the most vulnerable. Vaccine trials here in Malawi and elsewhere have proved successful against a disease that across Africa kills more than 250,000 children under the age of 5 each year. Tonight, there is a real prospect of that appalling toll being consigned to the past.
I started my career as a malaria researcher, and I longed for the day that we would have an effective vaccine against this ancient and terrible disease. And today is that day, an historic day.
Malaria is a disease transmitted by mosquitoes from one human to another, a parasite that has evolved to evade our immune system and much harder to tackle than bacterial or viral infections like coronavirus. It accounts for the deaths of more than 400,000 people each year, the majority in sub-Saharan Africa, and it kills one child every 2 minutes. Trials on 800,000 children showed the vaccine prevented 30% of severe cases. Combined with existing treatments, protection rises to 70% in the peak malaria seasons. The vaccine is a result of decades of work. Its developers say they can supply up to 15 million doses a year for no more than 5% above the costs. But who will pay is not yet clear.
A major challenge is going to be the vaccine manufacture, the vaccine deployment, to get the vaccine available to the large number of children in that tropical zone of Africa that could truly benefit from it.
Here in Malawi, there will be real cause for celebration. Malaria places a heavy burden on a fragile health service. And even over the past year, it has been a bigger killer than COVID-19. For centuries, it has been a disease they have had to learn to live with and to die from. Tonight, for the first time, there is hope they can learn to live without it. John Ray, News at 10, Malawi.
And our health editor, Emily Morgan, joins us now. Emily, a huge moment, to say the least, but put it into perspective for us, just how important this moment is.
Do you know what? I don't think you can underestimate how significant this moment is. It is hugely important on a scientific level and on a historic level. I mean, the world has been looking for a malaria vaccine for more than 100 years. This is now the very first vaccine against a human parasite. So in scientific terms, this is a major breakthrough. And this vaccine targets the most deadly type of malaria. There are more than 100 types of malaria, but the most deadly is the most prevalent in Africa, which is why it's being rolled out there. 95% of deaths from malaria are in Africa, so this could have a huge impact on the most poorest people in Africa, in the poorest continent. Now, you could say that in comparison to other vaccinations, this really isn't very effective, and indeed it isn't. It's 30% effective against severe illness. But when you take into account how destructive malaria is, how deadly it is, mainly amongst tiny babies and children, the WHO believes that used alongside bed nets and insecticides, this warrants the major rollout and could save tens of thousands of lives. And it's not the only vaccine that's been developed. There's one by Oxford University that could be more effective. So this is just the start of something really exciting and potentially the beginning of the end of malaria.
The word historic is sometimes overused, but in this case, I think it's very apt. Thank you, Emily. To home now, and the Prime Minister has used his party conference speech to set out his vision of a high wages and low tax economy. He didn't give too much detail of how he'd do that, other than saying he would unleash the spirit of the British people. What he did say was reshaping the British economy will take time, and yes, sometimes it will be difficult.
Manchester, waking up on the final day of Conservative conference, with Boris Johnson promising to level up northern communities. His speech happening to land on the day the £20 uplift to universal credit was removed. Inside, snaking queues that began at 6 a.m.
Why does everyone want to wait for Boris so long?
What a silly question, young lady.
He's just got the personality, he's got the charisma.
Fire in the belly.
Finally, he was there. One final ruffle, and then out of the shadows and into his natural habitat, the limelight. The Prime Minister starting with a different take on COVID.
And we knew that some people would still be anxious. So we sent top government representatives to our sweatiest boîte de nuit to show that anyone could dance perfectly safely.
Teasing Michael Gove after he was filmed dancing on a colourful night out. Then he spoke about vaccines, the NHS and social care before turning to the centrepiece of the speech.
We're not going back to the same old broken model with low wages, low growth, low skills and low productivity, all of it enabled and assisted by uncontrolled immigration.
It was light on new policy, but did have a £3,000 salary bonus for new maths and science teachers in struggling schools, all part of what the Prime Minister calls levelling up.
Yes, it will take time, and sometimes it will be difficult, but that was the change that people voted for in 2016, and that was the change that people voted for again powerfully in 2019.
He also spoke about violence against women before ending with that trademark optimism.
And that is the spirit we are going to unleash.
From now until the election, Boris Johnson is going to bang on about three words we just heard a lot of: wages, skills and jobs. But he is going to have to drown out those who are shouting about other things, like shortages, inflation and today's big benefit cut.
So what did the Minister in charge of levelling up make of it?
How is it levelling up when a universal credit cut is hitting people in the north more than the south?
Well, I thought the Prime Minister's speech was absolutely brilliant, and I think he defined levelling up so clearly and powerfully as a mix. It's a mix of making sure that we've got investment in transport, investment in skills, investment in infrastructure.
What about the chair of the party?
Funny, entertaining, engaging. Brilliant.
Great about levelling up, but tough when you're cutting benefits that hit the north more than the south.
No answer on that one then. This Red Wall MP liked the speech, but she still doesn't love her party's rise in national insurance.
At the moment, I think we need to be focusing on economic growth, and so a tax on jobs to me wasn't necessarily the right answer. But, you know, the vote was had, I lost, but now it's about working constructively.
Being constructive. That is exactly what Boris Johnson will be hoping for from his party. Anushka Astana, News at 10, Manchester.
As ever with a party conference speech, there is an element of preaching to the converted. What matters isn't so much how it goes down with the audience in the hall, but with voters beyond the precincts of the conference centre, particularly those Conservative voters who switched from Labour at the last election. In one former Red Wall seat, Lee, in Greater Manchester, people we spoke to today seemed to need a bit more convincing that the Prime Minister was a man with a plan.
The Prime Minister's optimistic vision might have been red meat to Tory delegates in the hall. In the real world, Butcher Grenferneville sees some real problems with the central idea of paying higher wages.
As long as the Labour out there is qualified, we're willing to pay more, but what he's got to realise is that the Labour isn't there. If you put a job on asking for a butcher and there's no butchers applying for the job, I think this is going to be a long road. Maybe 5-10 year plan, we might be, you know, it might solve itself, but there needs to be a lot going into training first.
This area Lee turned Tory in the last election, one of the so-called Red Wall seats the Prime Minister wants to keep on side.
There is no reason why the inhabitants of one part of the country should be geographically fated to be poorer than others.
At the local college, the promise of levelling up wasn't going down well with everyone.
He's talking there about everyone getting on a level playing field, but on the bottom of the screen it's saying that there's £20 of universal credit being taken from people every week.
Do you think that it is possible for the UK to move towards this high wage, different sort of model of economy?
I believe giving more job opportunities and upskilling, to use his words, the British people is a benefit. We have got jobless people, unemployed people in this country.
At the moment, there's no physical evidence of how we're going to have low taxes at the same time as higher wages for people. It doesn't add up.
Jean, trying to survive on universal credit, is also finding her sums don't add up.
My basic outgoings are about 314, so...
And so that leaves you how much to buy food a month?
£3.40.
She doesn't feel the Prime Minister has a real plan.
I don't understand how he's going to increase wages, increase jobs. I really don't understand that, how he's going to do it.
Despite the looming problems, the Labour MP who lost this seat feels she won't be getting it back anytime soon.
I don't think there's buyer's remorse as yet. I think, again, you know, I think it's going to have to affect people, if you like. Once they get hit in their pockets, then that's, you know, that's something for them to challenge.
With a difficult winter ahead for many in seats like Lee and far beyond, that's something that could yet dent the Prime Minister's sunny vision of the country's future. Romilly Weeks, News at 10 in Lee.
To Robert now, who is getting ready for tonight's edition of the Pest In programme. Robert, there were two distinct audiences for the Prime Minister's message tonight, weren't they? I mean, his supporters who were in the conference hall, but then also those real-world voters across the country, the likes of which we were hearing in Romilly's report. Will it land with both of them, do you think?
Well, let's see. That's to be clear, though, this was like no party conference that I've been to, and I've been going to them for, you know, not far off 30 years, in that it was all about one individual, Boris Johnson. He dominated it. You know, all the other ministers who spoke were in a very small room about the size of a TV studio. He had this big marquee. Their speeches were all pretty low-key, no big announcements. His was all razzmatazz, like a sort of US presidential rally, banners being held by adoring supporters. I mean, look, there wasn't a lot of big policy in it, but there was his normal, you know, rumbustious optimism and jokes and this positive vision for how we can be a high-wage, high-productivity country in a few years. Now, in terms of people outside the room, what he singularly failed to do was talk in any great depth about this cost of living problem, which seems to be turning into a cost of living crisis, which is squeezing many people's living standards, particularly those on middling and low incomes. And this is going to be the story, the economic story, the political story of at least the next year. For me, therefore, it wasn't a surprise that a Snap poll just put out by Opinion actually says, even though Keir Starmer's speech was criticised by some as being too long and being a bit ponderous, it landed better with most people, this Opinion poll says, than Boris Johnson's today. They think Keir Starmer was more in touch with their fears and their hopes.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed. Now, normally business would fall in behind the Conservative Prime Minister's speech, wouldn't they? But one Brexit-supporting boss who actually sits in the House of Lords as a Conservative has told us the Prime Minister's commitment to higher wages is not the answer. The problem isn't pay, according to Lord Wolfson, who runs Next, the fashion chain. It is a shortage of people. And Joel spoke to him. Joel, this is a bit of an embarrassment, isn't it, to have Lord Wolfson say the kind of things he did to you?
Well, this is the day, Rageh, that the Prime Minister was setting out his vision for a prosperous future. And on the same day, Lord Wolfson is saying there is a risk, actually, unless Boris Johnson changes his stance on immigration, that he will deliver nothing of the sort. The Chief Executive Next told ITV News something is going seriously wrong in our economy. Companies are trying to recruit, they're struggling to, they need the government to help them to bring in the workers they need from overseas. If they don't, there's a danger of persistent high inflation. Lord Wolfson rejects the allegations from government that businesses are addicted to cheap labour. He says the problem isn't low pay, it's a lack of people.
You know, when you have vegetable pickers being paid £1,000 a week on farms in Lincolnshire, you begin to realise this isn't just about money, and certainly that is our experience.
Really? It's not really about money? Isn't that what it's all about, pay?
It's about people available to do the work, and if those people have already got better permanent jobs, then offering them more expensive seasonal work will just deprive another industry of that person. All raising wages will do is put up prices, and we all know that raising prices to increase wages doesn't make anyone any richer. It leads to an inflationary spiral, which is really dangerous.
Now, the government sees things differently, Rageh. It says the solution here is domestic. If companies pay and improve pay and conditions, they will get the staff they need. The recruitment problems will disappear. Wolfson disagrees. He did vote to leave the EU, and he argues that Brexit was all about taking back control of immigration policy, not, he says, an excuse to pull up the drawbridge, which is what he feels Boris Johnson's government is doing. Wolfson proposes business should be allowed to apply for as many work visas as they need, with just two conditions. Foreign workers must be paid the same as British workers, and companies should pay a supplementary surcharge tax to the Treasury. If the government doesn't do something, Wolfson says, we're going to be in trouble and the squeeze on living standards will get worse.
Strong words. OK, thank you very much indeed. Now, before high inflation rates and interest rates can put a further squeeze on household budgets, if that is indeed what happens, 4.4 million families will already be without their £20 uplift in universal credit. As we reported a couple of minutes ago, that starts being withdrawn from today. Some don't know how they'll manage without it.
That £20 a week might not sound a lot, but it gets my children to school.
Most families wouldn't consider the school run a luxury.
On my spelling, I got 10 out of 10.
Fantastic.
Not long ago, Tony Bridgewood wouldn't have, until he had to give up work to look after his twin boys. He sold his house and his motorbike, but finding money for fuel is already a struggle, and he's now facing more impossible choices.
Sometimes I don't eat anything. It's only what the boys leave sometimes. And the options that I've got, really, is either the broadband or the phone or even school, where I have to take my children to school. There's homeschooling them.
Tony's is among 4.4 million families who are losing the £20 uplift. Making it permanent would cost the government £6 billion every year. Universal credit payments vary, but a young single person will see their standard allowance fall by a quarter, from £79 to £59 a week.
Cutting this lifeline is going to pull 500,000 more people into poverty, including 200,000 children. It's going to drive up debt. It's likely to drive up homelessness.
And right now, budgeting couldn't be harder. Like 40% of those claiming universal credit, Vicky, a single mother, also works. Ministers say they want higher wages, not higher benefits, but short-term, that's not much help.
Everything's just going to go up, all of my bills. It's frightening when you don't know how that really is going to affect me. I've got no buffer. I've got nothing there as my safety net other than this.
No. I hope you like this.
Even with the extra money, Tony has still relied on a food bank. The government says the uplift was only ever temporary, but losing it overnight will make this winter especially hard. Ben Chapman, News at 10, Stoke-on-Trent.
When the pandemic began in Wuhan in China, there was very sadly a rise in racist attacks here on people of Chinese, East Asian or Southeast Asian descent. They've continued ever since, but there have been few official numbers to show how bad it has been. Now ITV News has been given exclusive figures. They point to a rise in hate crimes of almost 50% to more than 2,000 cases. And those are just the ones that get reported.
Beaten so badly his face needed reconstruction surgery, Yuan Zhao is slowly recovering from his physical injuries. The mental scars will take longer.
At the time, no one really helped me. They didn't even call the police.
So this is a store you use a lot?
Yuan Zhao was close to his home in Cambridge last month, shopping at the Co-op store at the bottom of his street, when he was set upon by a gang who told him to go back to China.
There were like 10 people, so I was quickly outnumbered, and a lot of people started punching me. So majority of the punches was on my head. So I got a broken nose and some injury on my lower jaw and my temple.
The young man who came to study at Cambridge University and loved it so much he stayed says incidents of hate crime against the Asian community since the start of the pandemic have him reconsidering his future.
And for this to happen here in a place that you consider your home, a safe place, how does that leave you feeling?
This incident has a serious impact on me, so I'm really considering moving out of the city.
Figures given to ITV News showing reported hate crime against East Asians up almost 50% since before the pandemic become even more shocking in the knowledge that incidents are seriously underreported because of a culture that traditionally does not want to attract attention to itself.
People write to me about language that has been used.
Sarah Owen, Britain's first female MP of Chinese descent, says it's a community living with fear.
It's in the back of your mind every single day when you go out, or when you know that your mum or dad are walking to work or to and from the bus stop. I get it through emails, people saying how it's worsened their depression or that it's really had an emotional impact on them.
Her mailbag is full of messages from people who've suffered abuse because of their race. She herself has been abused leaving Parliament.
And this woman just pointed at me and shouted, "Watch out, Corona's about."
So this is more the defensive move.
In London, self-defence classes are being offered to people feeling vulnerable as a result of racist attacks like the one last April that left Darryl Law with a partly detached retina needing surgery to save his sight. He's recovered now, but wonders how he'll ever be able to explain to his young son why he was picked on.
My little boy, he's only 5 years old. I don't want to see him to know that, his dad got attacked. And there'll be questions as to why, what happened, and for me to tell him, oh, it's because the way that we look. He's going to grow up thinking, what is wrong with him.
Their stories are a disturbing reflection of COVID Britain. Even more shocking, the certain knowledge that so many more similar stories, some worse, are going untold. Paul Davis, News at 10.
In the chaos of the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan, our government's top priority was getting Britons out of Kabul, together with the Afghans who had supported our soldiers and our diplomats. But there are reports that as many as 7,000 Afghans are stuck in hotels as if they have been forgotten about whilst waiting to have their papers processed. Now the army has been sent to the hotels to help with the paperwork.
They left their home and everything they held dear in Afghanistan. And now this tiny hotel room has been their world for 6 weeks. Fareed Rahmani, his wife and his 6 children are crammed into 3 rooms in a Watford hotel. Their comfortable life in Kabul suddenly was snatched away.
It's really difficult, just to grow up in a country and after 37 years, you have to leave your country.
His old life as an interpreter at the British Embassy in Kabul seems like a distant dream, a dream which was shattered in the summer when gunmen tried to assassinate him. A bullet hit his arm, narrowly missing his heart. Their only possessions now are those given by charities. They have no idea when they'll be rehoused.
Unfortunately, we haven't heard anything from the Home Office. My children just keep asking me to get them enrolled in schools.
The new life of limbo is being experienced by 7,000 Afghans brought here under the Afghan Relocation and Assistance Policy. Zia Malikian family endured a 3-week hotel quarantine with a small baby and are still waiting for proper accommodation.
They need to take us somewhere so we know that this is our house where we can put in and we can send our children to school, and we know this is our life, so we can build our life in here.
Hello, so this is the boys' room. Today the Home Office confirmed the Army will now be helping to process these families, but it's already admitted it can't put a date on when they will be rehoused.
It is a concern that these families and very vulnerable young children are going to be in hotels for many weeks and many months, possibly right up to and through Christmas, because there doesn't appear to be the housing coming on stream.
Fareed's children are incredibly grateful for the sanctuary the UK has given them, but they need to start school, and these families need somewhere to call home. Dan Rivers, News at 10.
Finally, sometimes it doesn't always seem like it, but peaceful protest does have the power to change minds and even the course of history. The women of Greenham Common proved that, though it took a while. It is 40 years since their first march to protest at American nuclear missiles being based at the RAF station in Berkshire. And to mark the anniversary, a documentary has been made. It tells the story of their peace camps at the base and how they changed the nature of protests around the world.
It is a film telling the story of how, in 1981, a group of women decide to take matters into their own hands to halt the nuclear arms race and force the Americans to remove their cruise missiles from an RAF base at Greenham Common in Berkshire.
This ring around the Common was one of the largest demonstrations of its kind since the 1960s.
A handful becomes at one point 35,000 encircling the base, setting up camp, some getting arrested and jailed time and time again.
If they don't get rid of cruise missiles, yes, I'll go back and I'll go back and I'll go back.
So this was the runway?
Yes, this was the 4-mile runway.
And so we take her back 4 decades on. Rebecca Johnson spent 5 years living at the protest camp.
Big, heavy planes carrying the nuclear weapons in and out.
The site, now a picturesque common open to the public, she remembers the standoff when the US missiles arrived.
Can you believe now that you were that brave? You've got all these US soldiers pointing their rifles at you. We didn't feel brave. I was terrified, but nuclear war was much more terrifying.
The protesters would end up having a presence on the site for more than a decade, drawing worldwide attention. It had all started with a group walking from Cardiff to Greenham. Carmen Thomas was one of them.
We had small children with us, we had older women who were in their 60s and older, but we had a purpose. There was a goal at the end of it, there was this, there was a place we were going to go, which none of us had actually, you couldn't Google, so you didn't know what it looked like unless you'd been there.
In 1987, the political climate had changed and the US and Russian leaders signed an arms control treaty. 2 years later, the missiles started leaving Greenham.
Would you say that you all changed the world.
We changed ourselves, and in changing ourselves, we inspired so many women to change the world. Let me put it like that.
Tomorrow, the Greenham women will get a red carpet when their film premieres. Nina Nanar, News at 10 at Greenham Common.
The story of the Greenham Common protests. And that is it for tonight from all of us on News at 10. A very good night and thank you for watching.